Welcome back to So You Really Want to Learn Latin, and today we're going to tackle 3 chunks from the end of chapter 7 in book 3 of So You Really Want to Learn Latin. We're going to look at qui plus the subjunctive, and there are various things to learn about there. We're going to look at the slightly odd little rule about mounting his horse. And finally, we're going to have a little look at dum, our old friend dum, which up until now we've just thought meant while. Dum 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 while I'm singing this song. Dum 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 dum. Don't know why, but that's how I used to teach people what dum meant. Anyway, back to qui plus the subjunctive. Okay, so 3 little things that we need to know about qui plus the subjunctive. First of all, a qui clause can be used to express purpose, in the same way that ut plus the subjunctive is used in a final clause to express purpose. Okay, and what happens is instead of using ut followed by the subjunctive, we use qui followed by the subjunctive. Now you need to see an example of that for that to make any kind of sense at all. So I'll give you an example. We've got in the book milites misit qui oppidum oppugnarent. Okay, milites misit, he sent soldiers, qui oppidum oppugnarent. Now, he sent soldiers who, and it sounds like you're going into a relative clause, which you are, but it's a sort of special relative clause because it's indicating the purpose for which he sent the soldiers. Okay, same rules apply. It still refers back to the antecedent, okay, in gender and number, so no problem with that. But it's followed by the subjunctive, and therefore it's not just he sent soldiers who had, pink hair, or he sent soldiers who were jolly happy people. It's he sent soldiers who, oppidum oppugnarent, might attack the town. He sent soldiers who might attack the town. In other words, he sent soldiers to attack the town. He sent soldiers in order that they might attack the town. Okay, so it's another way of expressing purpose. Okay, now the second thing we need to learn is that where there's a comparative involved, we use quo rather than qui. So that's the ablative of qui quo quod, and it's basically translated as by which. Okay, ablative singular of qui quo quod, by which. Followed by a subjunctive, again expressing purpose. So you have a sentence like milites misit quo facilius oppidum caperet. Okay, now milites misit, he sent soldiers. Quo, by which facilius more easily oppidum caperet, he might capture the town. So he sent soldiers so that he could capture the town more easily. So this only works where there's a comparative in the final clause. Okay, he sent his friends to Rome so that they might more easily obtain food, for example. Okay, in a sentence like that, instead of ut plus the subjunctive, which you could use, we're going to use the relative pronoun plus the subjunctive, but we're going to use it in the ablative singular, by which. It's as if it's referring to the action. He did this by which action he might more easily do something. Okay, now the third use we're going to look at is where qui plus the subjunctive means of such a kind. And it's often used after the phrases is qui, or dignus qui, or est qui, or sunt qui, where these are used indefinitely. Okay, and these have the meaning of such a kind. So you get a phrase like dignus est qui regat. he is worthy to rule. Dignus est qui regat. He is worthy, qui plus the subjunctive, who may rule. He is worthy to rule. He is worthy. He is such a kind that he is worthy to rule. Okay, not massively common, but as always, when you're translating Latin and you see a verb in the subjunctive and you're scratching your head thinking, why on earth is that verb in the subjunctive? Just have a look. If it's coming after qui, it could be one of these sort of relative clauses which are referring to an indefinite group of people, the sort of person who would do this. So we've got an example in here in the book, sunt qui pericula belli timeant. Okay, sunt qui, there are some who pericula belli timeant, fear the dangers of war. There are some who fear the dangers of war. Okay, and we're talking about an indefinite group of people, not particular people that we can kind of name or point at, but just generally there are some people who fear the dangers of war. Okay, right. So that deals with qui plus the subjunctive. Now the second thing I want to talk about today is this sort of rule about mounting his horse. Okay. Now we call it mounting his horse just because that's a good example of this situation, where in English we use a present participle when in fact what we're doing is referring to something that must by definition have happened in the past. Okay? And the classic example of that is mounting his horse, he rode off into the sunset. Okay? Now if you think about what that actually means, it doesn't mean that he kind of rode off into the sunset while mounting his horse, and all the time that he was riding into the sunset he was still mounting his horse. I mean, that would be absurd. So of course what it actually means is, having mounted his horse, he rode off into the sunset. Okay? Now so you just have to be a little bit careful with the difference between English idiom and Latin idiom. Okay? In Latin, where the action of what sounds like the participle must have preceded the action of the verb, then you have to show that by using a past participle. Whereas in English we don't do that. Okay? So you only use the present participle when it is, and there comes a great word, when it is coterminous with the action of the main verb. Okay, in other words, happening at the same time. Okay, so we've got an example of that. Puerum spectabat librum legentem. Okay, now that means, puerum spectabat, he watched the boy, librum legentem, reading the book. Now, all the time that he was watching the boy was reading the book. So that's absolutely fine. That's what we would do in English. But if you had a sentence such as, seizing his sword, he killed the slave. Okay? Seizing his sword, he killed the slave. Those two things do not happen at the same time. They are not coterminous. The seizing his sword bit happened, indeed had to have happened, before he could kill the slave with it. So you have to say something like, having seized his sword. And of course, because of the way Latin works, you can't say having seized his sword, because Latin does not have a perfect participle active. You have to flip it around and make it an ablative absolute. So, gladio rapto, with the sword having been seized, servum interfecit, he killed the slave. Okay, so we would translate that, gladio rapto servum interfecit, as seizing his sword, he killed the slave. But you see that in Latin that isn't what it said. It very specifically said, having seized his sword. with the sword having been in the past seized or taken, then he went on and killed the slave. Okay, it's another sort of example of where Latin is very precise with time and the difference between the different kind of time zones in which actions happen. A little bit like the future perfect. You remember if in English we say something like, when you come to school, I will give you your book. Well, that's what we say in English, when you come, using a kind of present tense. In Latin, they would always turn that to when you will have come, I will give you your book. Because I can't give you your book until you've come, but you haven't yet even set off. So that is exactly what the future perfect tense is used for. Okay, so mounting his horse is just another example of that. The Romans are very precise about the time zone they are in. And that brings me neatly onto the third thing I wanted to cover today, which is more about our little friend dum, meaning while. Okay, so again we're talking about time. Now, as you know, dum means while. But when dum is followed by the subjunctive, it actually changes its meaning and it means provided that. Okay, so example here we have is Magno timore me liberabis dum inimicos meos interficias. Okay, Magno timore me liberabis dum inimicos meos interficias. Okay, Magno timore me liberabis. Okay, go to the verb liberabis. You will free me, you will free me, magno timore, from a great fear. You will free me from a great fear. Dum inimicos meos interficias. Now, dum followed by the subjunctive, therefore it does not mean while, it means provided that. Provided that interficias, you kill inimicos meos, my enemies. Okay, you will release me from a great fear, provided that you kill my enemies. Okay, so that's a great little use of dum plus the subjunctive. Now, dum can also mean until. Okay, so followed by the indicative, if the action is referring to the past, it can mean until. So, for example, we have here in senatu fuit, dum senatus dimissus est. In senatu fuit. He was in the Senate, dum. Now, it looks like it's meaning while, but it wouldn't make much sense for it to be while. He was in the Senate, dum senatus dimissus est, until the Senate was dismissed. He was in the Senate until the Senate was dismissed. Okay, dum, referring to the past, meaning until. But when it's referring to the future, you get dum followed by the subjunctive, again meaning until. So if we look at this one, expectamus dum hostes urbem oppungnent. Expectamus, we wait, we are waiting, dum, until, hostes urbem oppungnent, until the enemy attack the city. We are waiting until the enemy attack the city. Or we are waiting for the enemy to attack the city. Okay, and one more example. Expectabamus dum hostes urbem oppungnarent. Okay, we were waiting, dum, until hostes, the enemy, urbem oppungnarent, attacked the city. In other words, we were waiting for the enemy to attack the city. Okay, so that's enough about that. These are, little points, but it just goes back to this thing that I've said again and again since we started learning the subjunctive. When you see a slab of Latin and the verb is in the subjunctive, you must ask yourself, why? Why is that verb in the subjunctive? There will always be a reason. you can't ignore the fact that it's in the subjunctive. It isn't just in the subjunctive because someone popped it in the subjunctive because they had nothing better to do. It's in the subjunctive for one of these reasons. It's one of the constructions that you've been learning. And sometimes it's a kind of full-blown construction, like a final clause or a consecutive clause or an indirect question, an indirect command, proper construction. And sometimes it's more of a nuance. The word dum followed by the subjunctive changes its meaning. Instead of meaning while, it means either provided that, as we saw in those first examples, or when referring to the future, it means until. Okay, so some good stuff there. Okay, that'll do for now. We will just have a quick look. We've got a slab of Latin here, which may or may not test these things. Who knows? Let's have a little look. It's called exercise 7.16, and it is the story of Sulla retiring into private life in 79 BC. So you notice our dates are getting closer and closer, to the swap over from BC to AD. So we're, flying along through Roman history. And we're just going to have a little look at this passage, see what happens. So we have hostibus tandem superatis, Sulla pluribus cives interfecit, ne ab eis opprimeritur. Okay? Now, hostibus tandem superatis. Okay? Ablative absolute. With the enemy at last having been overcome. Now, I'm being a little bit lazy here by not trundling all the way down to the end of the sentence to find the main verb. I guess because ablative absolutes, we often say they are scene-setting phrases. They often come at the beginning of a sentence to set the scene. Well, when you spot what it looks pretty obviously like an ablative absolute, you've got a noun in the ablative followed by a participle in the ablative, you don't really need to go shuffling down the sentence to find the proper subject and the proper main verb, because you just deal with the abby on the way. So let's hope that's worked here. So, with the enemy at last having been overcome, Sulla, now that looks like a nominative, pluribus cives interfecit. Sulla killed pluribus cives, very many citizens, ne, okay, lest ab eis opprimeritur, lest he be overwhelmed by them. Opprimo, to overwhelm or overcome, really. So Sulla killed very many citizens, lest he be overcome by them. So that's a negative final clause, in order that he might not be overcome. Populum Romanum adeo terebat, ut tandem omnes inimici eus domi manere nolent. Okay, it's revising lots of things, not necessarily the things we've just done, but anyway, let's have a little look. Populum Romanum adeo terebat. Okay, now don't make the mistake of leaping at Populum Romanum, because those words are in the accusative case, and you never, never, never translate an accusative case before you have translated the verb. So, adeo terebat, he terrified Populum Romanum, the Roman people, adeo, to such an extent. Now, when you see that word, you know you're going into a result clause, a consecutive clause. Okay. He terrified them to such an extent, you know you're going to have the word ut, and you know a verb in the subjunctive is coming. So, ut tandem omnes inimici eus domi manere nolent. Ut, there's your with the result that. Omnes inimici eus, all his enemies. Okay, they're in the nominative case, so these enemies are going to be the subject of the subjunctive when you find it, which is right at the end, nolent. So, with the result that all his enemies were unwilling, that's from nolo, manere, to remain domi at home. Okay, so he terrified the Roman citizens, he terrified the Roman people to such an extent that all his enemies were unwilling to remain at home. Hic enim custodibus suis imperavit. Hic enim, for he, hic haec hoc, this man, for he, custodibus suis imperavit, ordered, now remember the verb impero takes the dative, ordered his guards, suis custodibus, ut, okay, so this is an indirect command, he ordered them ut, and we're going to have a subjunctive, this is what he's going to order them to do, ut inimicos captos, now be careful, that's an accusative, so we want to go and find the subject of this, or the main verb. Divitius eorum raptis, now that is an ablative absolute. The commas help kind of comma it off, and you think, oh, well, hang on, that's a little phrase I might want to come back to. And you go all the way to caederent. Now there's your subjunctive. So he ordered his guards, for he ordered his guards to caederent, to slaughter inimicos, the enemies, captos, having been captured. So he ordered his guards to slaughter the captured enemies, the enemies having been captured, divitios eorum raptis, with their riches, okay, with the riches of them, eorum of them, so there, with their riches, raptis having been seized. So you've got lots of past participles here, which you've got to kind of keep track of. Which time zone are we in? So actually we are revising what we've done in a slightly different way, just looking out at the time zones. So just to do that again, for he ordered his guards that, in other words, to, and we know he's going to order them to do something, and the thing that they are ordered to do is going to be in the subjunctive. So he ordered them, caederent, to slaughter. Who did he order them to slaughter? Well, he ordered them to slaughter inimicos, the enemies. Okay? Inimicos, by the way, is a private enemy, where hostes means the enemy generally. So he ordered them to slaughter the enemies, but which enemies? The enemies who are described as captos, having been captured. So he ordered them to slaughter the captured enemies is actually another way of saying he ordered them to capture and slaughter the enemies. Okay? And then when should they do that? Well, they should do that, we've got this ablative absolute, divitis eorum raptis, with their riches having been seized. So you can lay that out as he ordered them to capture the enemies, having seized their riches, and then kill them. Okay? A bloodthirsty sort of story, really. Okay. Saepe rogabat, quis Marium adjuvisset. Saepe rogabat, he often asked, quis Marium adjuvisset, who had helped Marius. He often asked who had helped Marius. Okay, and then, tum custodes iussisunt, eos cives petere et interficere. Then, custodes iussisunt, the guards were ordered, cives petere et interficere, to seek these citizens and kill them. And notice there that you've got an indirect command, but it's after eubeo, and eubeo just uses an infinitive, not the ut plus the subjunctive construction. Okay? You know, there's a lot to kind of keep in your head while you're doing this stuff, but that explains what was going on there. Okay, let's finish this off. Postea Sulla dictator factus est. Postea, afterwards, Sulla factus est became dictator. Remember, Theo means I am made or I become, and it has a fieri factor. It's a semi-deponent verb, Theo fieri factus sum, and it is the equivalent of I am made. So afterwards, Sulla was made dictator. Afterwards, Sulla became dictator. Tres annos res urbis agebat, dum tandem ex urbe egressus in Campaniam ad vilem suam iit ut quiete ruri frueretur. Okay, nice long sentence to finish off with. Okay, tres annos. Okay, for 3 years, so that's time how long goes in the accusative. For 3 years, res urbis agebat. He managed the affairs of the city. Agebat, ago, agri, agi, arctum, I do or I manage. Res, the things, urbis, of the city. So he managed the things of the city. In other words, he managed the affairs of the city. Dum, now, what's going to happen with this? Dum tandem ex urbe egressus. So, dum tandem ex urbe egressus. So dum here, not meaning while, but meaning until. Until egressus, having gone out. Okay, that's from egredior, and it's kind of short for egressus est, until he went out, but it's using it as a participle, so you haven't added the part of sum, and you're left with a perfect participle active, and you can only form perfect participles active when you're using a deponent verb, which is what we've got here. So, for 3 years he managed the affairs of the city until, having gone out, tandem at last, ex urbe, out of the city, in Campaniam ad vilem suam iit. He went, iit from eo, he went into Campania, to his villa. So he went to his villa in Campania. Ut quiete ruri fruerita, in order that he might enjoy. Now, fruor is followed by the ablative of the thing that you enjoy. So, in order that he might enjoy quiete, the quiet, the peace, ruri, in the countryside. And remember our little thing about prepositions. You don't use prepositions when talking about towns, small islands, domus and rus. Okay, well, there's a classic example. The locative case of rus is ruri. So, in the country, no preposition, locative case, in order that he might enjoy the peace in the countryside. Okay, right, a lot to get through that time. We've done 3 little chunks of Latin that we had to have a look at. We had qui plus the subjunctive, we had mounting his horse, and we had a new kind of way of translating dum, and we've even translated a little story, so haven't we been busy? Right, next time we're going to do a general revision of all of the constructions we've done so far. We're going to get Emma and Sophie back to have a little look at that. And until then, keep up the good work on the Latin. Look at the amazing progress you're making as we trundle through this course. And I'll see you back here on this channel very soon.